All those in favor of converting the basement storage unit into the new wellness center, raise your hand. Aunt Patricia's voice was crisp, cutting through the silence of the library like a knife through old velvet. She did not look at me, she did not have to. Around the mahogany table, hands shot up. First Uncle Richard, then Kyle, then Stephanie. It was unanimous. They were not voting on a storage unit. They were voting on my home. For 3 years, I had lived in the garden-level apartment of the Vanderbilt Arms, a historic brownstone on Beacon Hill that my family had occupied for generations. To them, I was just occupying space, a temporary charity case, a squatter in the family legacy. "It is settled then," Patricia said, snapping her leather portfolio shut. She slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. It stopped right at the edge of the table, inches from my hand. A typed eviction notice. 30 days. "It is nothing personal, Vera," Stephanie added, checking her reflection in her phone screen. "But honestly, the basement smells like stagnation. A wine cellar will actually add value to the property. You understand, right?" Kyle laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Yeah, V, consider it a push. You cannot squat here forever. Time to join the real world." I looked at the notice. I looked at their faces, smug, comfortable, completely assured of their power. They thought they were the board of directors. They thought this building, this library, this very table belonged to them by right of blood. I did not argue. I did not beg. I did not remind them that I had fixed the boiler last winter with my own money, or that I was the one who curated the archives they ignored. I just picked up the paper. Above us, the crystal chandelier caught the winter light, fracturing it into 1,000 rainbows. I watched the dust motes dance in the beams. They were so beautiful. So silent, just like the truth I was holding in my back pocket. They were not evicting a tenant. They were declaring war on their landlord. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I walked down the narrow service stairs, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me, sealing off the scent of expensive perfume and old money. The air down here was different, cooler, smelling of damp earth and centuries-old brick. To them, it was the smell of failure. To me, it was the scent of ground zero. I entered my apartment and locked the door. I did not pack a single box. Instead, I walked to the vintage wardrobe in the corner and pulled out my uniform. Not a suit of armor, but a disguise. An oversized university hoodie, frayed at the cuffs. Leggings that had seen better days. I pulled my hair into a messy bun, letting loose strands fall across my face. This was the Vera they knew, the struggling archivist. The niece who needed help. I looked in the mirror. It was a perfect camouflage. Underneath that hoodie, my mind was running a billion-dollar algorithm, but all they saw was a girl who could not figure out her life. That morning, before the meeting, I had been in the kitchen making coffee when I heard them in the hallway. They did not even lower their voices. "It is tough love, really," Aunt Patricia had said to Stephanie. "If we keep letting her stay down there for free, she will never launch. Evicting her is practically a charity." "I know," Stephanie had sighed, the sound of ice clinking against glass. "It is embarrassing, honestly. Having a squatter for a cousin. I cannot even film content in the library without worrying she will wander into the frame looking like that." They laughed. A light, airy sound that stripped the skin right off my dignity. I had stood there, hand gripping the countertop until my knuckles turned white. That was the moment the last thread of loyalty snapped. They did not see a family member. They saw a stain on their aesthetic. But here is the secret they never understood. Invisibility is a superpower. Because they thought I was nothing, they never bothered to hide anything from me. Why lock the filing cabinet when the person in the room is just poor, confused Vera? Why shred the bank statements when the niece does not understand finance? For 2 years, I had been the invisible ghost in the machine of the Vanderbilt Arms. I collected the mail they left unopened on the hall table. I saw the urgent red stamps on the property tax notices. I saw the foreclosure warnings from the city that Uncle Richard hid between pages of his golf magazines. They treated me like furniture. And in return, I learned the architecture of their destruction. I sat down at my desk, a sleek, multi-screen setup, hidden behind a folding screen, and woke up my computer. The screens glowed to life, illuminating the dark stone walls. They called this place a dungeon. I called it a command center. I pulled up the deed transfer records again, just to look at them. To feel the weight of the digital signature. I remembered the day the auction closed. It was silent. No gavel, just a notification on my screen. The trust had defaulted on the master lease renewal 3 months ago. The building had gone to a silent lien auction, and I had bought it. I bought the roof over their heads, the floorboards under their feet, and the very table where they had just voted to destroy me. They thought silence was weakness. They thought my lack of protest was submission. They did not realize that I was not arguing because I did not need to. You do not argue with tenants who are 3 months behind on rent, you just prepare the paperwork. I sat back, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. Let them have their champagne tonight. Let them toast to their new wine cellar and their cleansed reputation. I was not the invisible tenant anymore. I was the wolf waiting at the door, and I had the keys. Night settled over Beacon Hill, heavy with snow and silence, but the ceiling above my head vibrated with the dull thud of celebration. They were opening the good champagne tonight. I could hear the muffled laughter, the clinking of crystal, the sound of people toasting to their own cleverness. They were celebrating the future wine cellar. They were celebrating the removal of the stain in the basement. I sat in the glow of my monitors, a mug of black tea steaming beside my hand. On the screen, a different kind of picture was forming. It was not a family portrait. It was an autopsy of their finances. Most people look at a family like the Vanderbilts, or what was left of us, and see the brownstone, the tailored coats, the summer convictions in the Hamptons, and they think wealth. They see the asset, but in my line of work, we have a saying: assets feed the ego, cash flow feeds the family. I opened the file labeled Tenant Audit. Kyle. My cousin Kyle liked to talk about decentralization and the future of currency. At dinner, he would lecture me on why saving money was for boomers and how he was leveraging yield farms, but the numbers on my screen told a tragedy. His crypto wallet was not a vault, it was a sieve. He was over-leveraged on margin loans, borrowing against assets that had already depreciated by 40%. He drove a leased luxury SUV he bad not made a payment on in 3 months. He was what we call asset-rich, cash-poor, except he did not even really own the assets, he owned the debt attached to them. I clicked to the next tab. Stephanie. Stephanie was an influencer. To her 50,000 followers, she was the epitome of old money aesthetic. But looking at the credit card statements linked to the building's maintenance account records I had access to because I bought the debt, the truth was pathetic. Invoice number 4092, lobby decor consultation, $5,000. Cross-referenced with her social media, that was the exact price of the vintage Chanel bag she unboxed the same day. Invoice number 4103, emergency plumbing repair, $3,000. Funny, because I fixed that leak myself with a wrench and a $10 part. The date coincided with her weekend trip to Tulum. She was not rich. She was insolvent. Solvency is the ability to meet your long-term fixed expenses and accomplish long-term expansion and growth. It is boring. It is quiet. It is having the liquidity to write a check when the roof caves in. They did not have solvency. They had an illusion. They were burning the furniture to heat the house, convinced that because the fire was bright, they were warm. I leaned back in my chair, watching the data streams merge into a single, undeniable conclusion. They were drowning. Uncle Richard, the treasurer, had drained the trust's liquid reserves 5 years ago to cover bad investments in commercial real estate that went bust. He had been robbing Peter to pay Paul, moving money between accounts to hide the hemorrhage. And me? I looked at my own accounts. Quiet, boring, liquid. I did not have a leased car. I did not have a closet full of bags I could not afford. I had cash flow. I had ownership. I had the deed to the ground they were standing on. It is a strange feeling, realizing the giants you grew up fearing are actually just standing on stilts. You do not need to push them over. You just need to wait for the wind to change. Above me, the music got louder. Let them dance. Let them drink the vintage bottles that technically belong to me now. They were partying on the deck of the Titanic, and I was the iceberg they never saw coming. Morning arrived with the pale, unforgiving light of a New England winter. The kind of light that exposes cracks in the plaster and dust on the velvet. I did not wake up to an alarm. I woke up to a notification on my phone. My bank app. The quarterly dividend from my commercial portfolio had just cleared. It was a number with enough zeros to buy this entire block, yet here I was, supposedly counting down the hours to my homelessness. I got out of bed. I did not reach for the cardboard boxes they expected me to fill. I did not start wrapping my few possessions in newspaper. Instead, I picked up my phone and opened a contact I had saved simply as H. Mr. Henderson. 9 o'clock. The library. It is time. His reply was immediate. I have the documents. See you then. I showered, dressing carefully. Underneath the oversized gray hoodie, I wore a silk blouse and tailored trousers. It was a private armor. A reminder that the person they saw was not the person who existed. When I walked upstairs to the main floor, the house was quiet, nursing the hangover of victory. The remnants of their celebration were still scattered on the foyer table, half-empty flutes, a discarded cork, the typed eviction notice they had gleefully slid across the table 12 hours ago. I walked into the kitchen. Kyle was there, leaning against the marble island, chugging a detox juice. He looked rough, the kind of exhaustion that comes from chasing losses all night. He saw me, and smirked, though his eyes looked anxious. "Rough morning, V?" he asked, wiping his mouth. "Need some help finding boxes? I know a guy who runs a moving company, might give you a discount if I ask nicely." "I am good, Kyle," I said, pouring myself a coffee. My hand was steady. "Save your favors, you might need them," he laughed, shaking his head. "Always so dramatic. Look, do not make this hard, just be out by the first, we have contractors coming to measure for the wine racks." Aunt Patricia swept in then, wearing a silk robe that cost more than my supposed annual income. She looked at me with that familiar mix of pity and distaste. "Vera," she said, clutching her coffee mug, "I hope you are not up here to beg." The vote was final. We are not changing our minds. "I am not here to beg, Aunt Patricia," I said, leaning against the counter. "I am just letting you know that Mr. Henderson is coming over at 9. The room went still. Patricia exchanged a look with Kyle. A look of triumph. They thought I had called him to plead for an extension. Or perhaps they thought he was coming to physically enforce their order. "Mr. Henderson?" Patricia's smile turned sharp. "Good. It is about time we made this official. He can explain the legalities to you if you are having trouble understanding the concept of eviction." "Exactly," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "He is coming to finalize the transition." "Transition," Kyle chuckled. "That is a nice word for kicking you out. But sure. Transition. Make sure you are all in the library," I said, turning to leave. "We need everyone present. Signatures will be required." "Oh, we will be there," Patricia called after me, her voice light and airy. I would not miss it. I walked back down the hall, the sound of their confident laughter following me. They thought the lawyer was the executioner, they thought they were the jury. They did not realize they were the defendants, and the trial was about to begin. Mr. Henderson arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. He was a man of the old-school three-piece wool suit, a briefcase that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. The family was arranged around the library table, like a royal court awaiting a tribute. Aunt Patricia sat at the head, her posture rigid with entitlement. Uncle Richard sat to her right, checking his watch, sweating slightly despite the chill in the room. Kyle and Stephanie lounged on the leather sofa, scrolling on their phones, bored by the formalities of my execution. When the heavy oak doors opened, Patricia did not even stand up. "Arthur," she said, gesturing vaguely to the empty chair opposite her. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We need the eviction papers served immediately. Vera is being difficult." Mr. Henderson did not sit. He did not even look at her. He walked past the head of the table, past Uncle Richard, past the sprawled cousins, and stopped directly in front of me. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of genuine deference. I had never seen him offer anyone in this family, not even my grandfather. "Good morning, Vera," he said, his voice warm. I have the portfolio updates you requested. The quarterlies look exceptional. The room went quiet. Not the quiet of a library, but the quiet of a vacuum. The air was suddenly too thin to breathe. Arthur? Patricia's voice was sharp, brittle. What are you doing? We are not here to discuss portfolios. We are here to remove the tenant. Mr. Henderson turned slowly to face her. He set his briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. The sound echoed like 2 gunshots. There seems to be a significant misunderstanding regarding the legal standing of the occupants of this building, he said, pulling out a thick stack of files. And frankly, Patricia, it is time we addressed the elephant in the room. Or rather, the thief at the table. He slid a single red folder toward Uncle Richard. 3 years ago, the Vanderbilt Trust was due to renew the 99-year master lease on this brownstone, Mr. Henderson said, his tone clinical. The renewal fee was $4.5 million. The funds were withdrawn from the trust's primary account. Richard's face turned the color of wet ash. He stared at the folder, his hands trembling. However, Henderson continued, the funds never reached the city clerk. They were diverted into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. A company linked to you, Richard. That is a lie, Richard whispered, though he did not look up. It is a paper trail, Henderson corrected. And it is airtight. Because the fee was not paid, the master lease expired. The Vanderbilt Trust lost its claim to this property 2 years ago. The city seized the building and put it up for a silent lien auction to recoup the debt. Auction? Kyle laughed nervously, finally looking up from his phone. That is impossible. We would have known. Someone would have bought it. Someone did, I said. My voice was soft, but it carried. Every head turned to me. The auction was silent, Kyle. Closed envelope, no press, just liquidity. I reached into my bag and pulled out the document I had been keeping safe for 24 months. It was heavy, bound in blue legal paper, stamped with the official seal of the city of Boston. I walked over to the table. I did not slide it. I did not toss it. I placed it gently, deliberately. Right in the center of the mahogany surface, where they had voted to erase me yesterday. Mr. Henderson did not come here to evict me, I said, looking Patricia dead in the eye. He came here to introduce you to the landlord. Henderson smiled, a rare, thin expression. I have had the honor of managing Vera's real estate holdings for the past 2 years. She is the sole owner of the deed to the Vanderbilt Arms, and she is the only reason you are not all currently on the street. The silence that followed was not just quiet, it was the sound of a world ending. Kyle was the first to break the paralysis. It was not a dignified protest, it was the sputtering of a child who had just realized the game controller was unplugged. This is fraud, he stammered, his face flushing a blotchy red. You cannot just buy a building from under a trust. There are laws, there are protections. There are, I agreed, leaning back in my chair. And Mr. Henderson followed every single one of them. Unlike Uncle Richard, Richard was slumped in his chair, staring at the red folder as if it were a radioactive isotope. He knew exactly what was inside. Wire transfers, offshore account numbers, the forensic accounting of his theft. Vera, darling, Aunt Patricia said, her voice trembling into a frequency only dogs could hear. She tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. Let's not be dramatic, we are family. We voted to convert the basement, yes, but we were going to find you a lovely apartment. We would have paid the deposit. You voted to evict me, I corrected her. You gave me 30 days to vacate the premises so you could store vintage Pinot Noir where I sleep. Do not rewrite history, just because you realized I am holding the pen. I stood up. I did not rush. I unzipped the hoodie I had worn for 3 years, letting it slide off my shoulders onto the floor. Underneath, the tailored silk blouse caught the light. I pulled the pins from my messy bun, smoothing my hair back. The transformation was not magical, it was psychological. The niece dissolved, the landlord remained. For years, you have lived here rent-free, I said, my voice filling the room. You have charged your lifestyle to the building's maintenance fund. You have treated the staff like servants and the property like a limitless credit card. But the trust is gone. The lease is expired. And I am not a charity. I reached into my bag again. I pulled out 4 cream-colored envelopes. These are not eviction notices, I said, sliding one to Kyle, one to Stephanie, one to Richard, and the last to Patricia. I am a fair businesswoman. I believe in giving tenants a chance to retain their housing. Patricia opened hers. Her hands shook so hard the paper rattled. These are invoices, I explained. Market rate for a 4-bedroom unit in Beacon Hill is currently $12,000 a month, plus a premium for the historic amenities. And, of course, the back rent for the 24 months you have been squatting in my building since the trust dissolved. Stephanie gasped, dropping her envelope. $200,000? I do not have that kind of money. I know, I said. I have seen your credit report. You spent your liquidity on a trip to Tulum and a handbag you could not afford. I turned to Kyle. And you, the crypto genius. I am willing to accept Bitcoin. But looking at your portfolio this morning, I do not think that is going to help you much either. The room was thick with the smell of panic. It was a specific scent, the ozone smell of burning ego. They were realizing, all at once, that the lifestyle they flaunted was a costume, and the bill had finally come due. You cannot do this, Richard whispered hoarsely. I will go to jail. That seems likely, Mr. Henderson agreed, not looking up from his notes. The embezzlement charges are separate from the civil suit for the back rent. I would suggest you find counsel, Richard. I am no longer available to represent you. Patricia looked at me, her eyes wide and wet. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrifying vulnerability. Vera. Please. Where will we go? This is our home. No, I said, placing my hands on the table. This is my building. It became my home, the day I saved it from your husband's greed. It became my home the day I realized none of you would ever offer me a seat at this table unless I bought the table. I checked my watch. You have 24 hours to pay the balance in full or vacate the premises. If you are not out by noon tomorrow, the sheriff will execute the removal. I believe you know the procedure. You typed up a very helpful notice for me yesterday. I turned to Mr. Henderson. Arthur, I will be in my office. The basement. I walked out of the library, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their own making. I did not look back. Landlords do not look back. We look at the bottom line. 3 months later, the library of the Vanderbilt Arms was finally quiet. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn back, letting the pale winter sun wash over the mahogany table. The crystal chandelier did not vibrate with the bass of techno music or the shrill laughter of people spending money they did not have. It was just a room. A beautiful, historic room that finally belonged to someone who knew how to take care of it. I sat at the head of the table, Aunt Patricia's old seat, reviewing the restoration plans. The irony was not lost on me. They had voted to evict me to build a wine cellar. Instead, I was converting the unused attic space into affordable studios for visiting academics. The ecosystem of the building had healed. Uncle Richard was not worrying about wine cellars anymore. He was currently preoccupied with a forensic audit by the district attorney's office. Mr. Henderson had been thorough. The embezzlement charges were sticking. Aunt Patricia had downsized. She moved into a 2-bedroom condo in the seaport. It was modern, glass, and soulless, exactly the kind of luxury she pretended to hate but was now forced to endure. She sent me an email last week, asking if there were any family heirlooms she could retrieve from storage. I replied with a scanned copy of the auction manifest. Everything she left behind was now building property. Kyle and Stephanie had vanished into the ether of figuring it out. Kyle was crashing on a friend's couch in Southie, and Stephanie was learning that influencer is not a landlord-accepted occupation without a cosigner. But I did not evict everyone. Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper they had treated like a ghost for 20 years, was now the building manager. I doubled her salary on day 1. The quiet tenants on the 3rd floor, the ones Richard had tried to bully out with rent hikes, were given long-term lease renewals. I closed my laptop. The screen went black, reflecting my face. No hoodie today, no disguise, just Vera. I walked through the hallway, my heels clicking on the marble. The air did not smell like stagnation anymore. It smelled like beeswax and fresh paint. It smelled like ownership. I realized then that legacy is not what you inherit. It is not a name, a trust fund, or a seat at a table you did not build. Legacy is competence. It is the quiet work you do in the dark, while everyone else is dancing in the light. They thought I was a squatter, because I lived in the basement. They did not understand that the foundation is the most important part of the house. While they were decorating the penthouse, I was reinforcing the beams. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out onto Beacon Hill. The snow was falling softly, blanketing the city in white silence. I buttoned my coat and looked up at the building. My building. I was not the niece. I was not the archivist. I was the architect of my own life. And the view from here was perfect. Real power does not need to shout. If you have ever been the quiet one in the room holding all the answers, hit subscribe. We are building our own table.